Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and supposed to be every week, I send out an email which is all about the future of radio and radio's international trends and all of that, and this is the podcast version for people that either can't be bothered to read or indeed can't read. This is the version for October the 24th, and as you can possibly tell already, I try not to edit this because, try to just read it all the way through and see what happens. Might do some edits on this, we'll see. Anyway, it's entitled BBC Sounds Sees No Growth, but ABC sees 22% increase. BBC Sounds, the corporation's app for radio, music and podcasts, has posted a weekly average of 4.3 million users in its last quarterly figures. Now that's unchanged from the previous quarter, entirely flat. The BBC posted 178 million plays of on-demand radio and podcasts in the quarter. That's also flat. 392 million plays of audio overall, which is also flat, and an additional 256 million podcast downloads on third-party platforms. That's not flat. It's a decline of 3.1% quarter on quarter. Now, I see a lot of podcast and on-demand data from across the world. Not one is showing flat figures or even declines apart from the BBC. And as I wondered in July, when I took a look at the annual reports figures, what is going on with BBC Sounds? Why is nobody, continuing to use it? Or at least, why isn't the audience figures increasing for this thing? Now, to be fair, BBC Sounds did achieve a record audience of 4.53 million people using it in the week following the UK government's now retracted mini-budget. Now, that coincided with a set of interviews on BBC local radio, and for many people it was the only way that they could have heard those interviews. So, given that they were the only interviews that Liz Truss had really done that week, it does show the benefit of excellent content, and content that was promoted on all the news outlets, not just the BBC. Or rather, at least it does show that an extra 200,000 people might try the service if that happens. But did they stick around? Well, we'll find out next quarter, because that week was the last week of the quarter. By contrast, in Australia, the ABC's annual report was published, and the national broadcaster is seeing 33 million downloads per month for its podcasts, up 22% year on year. News shows got the highest increase, up by 50% year on year. The ABC News Daily achieved 46% higher downloads than its predecessor, The Signal, though I do wonder how much of that is down to the simple work of calling a daily news podcast a name that you'd expect a daily news podcast to actually have. Anyway, Conversations, which is an interview show, remains number one, albeit with an 8% drop. Now, the ABC aren't in the Australian podcast ranker, and that leaves ARN's iHeart Podcast Network Australia to claim the number one spot. They got just 18 million downloads in September 2022, which is about half as much as the ABC. And to me, it remains a little bit baffling why the ABC aren't in a ranker that they said at launch that they would join in a few months. Perhaps I might bother somebody at the press office to find out. In other news, is your public broadcaster on your coins? I linked to the ABC's commemorative coin. It turns 90 years old this year, and the BBC's 100-year-old commemorative coin. And it's interesting to compare both of them. The ABC's is covered with logos and images from some of the corporation's output, a lot of kids' shows, entertainment shows like Countdown, which is a music show over here, and news brands like Four Corners and Foreign Correspondent. The BBC's, it's a picture of the world, ostensibly a redrawing of the BBC News opening graphics, with no recognisable logo at all, which seems rather a shame. BBC Radio 4 invited Miriam Margolyes as a live guest on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, where she swore like a trooper. Would you like to have a quick listen? Here we go. Oh, careful, by the way, swearing up ahead.
Well, I thought I'd be sitting in the seat.
Justin will help you
Jeremy
out
Hunt has just sat in, is what you're about to say.
When I saw him there, I just said, "You've got a hell of a job, the best of luck." And what I really wanted to say, fuck
Oh, no, you mustn't say that.
But you can't say that.
Yes, you can't say that. We'll have to have you out of the studio now.
Yes.
We'll have to have you out of the studio.
With many apologies.
Ouch. Now, as Krishnan Guru Murthy tweeted, you only book Miriam Margolyes to be live on air if you're either hoping she says something outrageous or you're a new producer who has never seen her on anything before, which is true. And an amusing quip. Though it wasn't long before Krishnan himself was suspended from his work on Channel 4 after calling Steve Baker the C word, which he didn't, by the way, do on air, but even so. Now, talking about Channel 4, their tweeting game is good. They congratulated the BBC for its 100th birthday. You're wondering what the tweet said, aren't you? Let me click through and I will tell you. It says, "Happy birthday, BBC, on your 100th birthday. When you were founded, we had a king. No one knew if they could afford to put their heating on, and we'd just lived through a global pandemic. Times really do change." Good work, Channel 4. Most impressive. A lovely piece from Steve Pratt I linked to, who warns us not to define ourselves by platform, but instead define ourselves by content. You'll find that linked in the show notes or my newsletter at james.craig.land. In Thailand, the Prime Minister recommended people to listen to the radio for emergency information about flooding, and that recommendation was used by the opposition as a way to point out how out of touch the Prime Minister was. But it turns out 86% of Thai people listen to the radio, 85.9% to FM, by the way, and 11.2% to AM, according to the government. So not so out of touch, really, is he? Lord Alton has written for The House on the BBC World Service cuts that I covered in the last podcast and, newsletter and all of that kind of thing. The UK government were approached, he says, and were aware of the consequences, but they went ahead anyway with those cuts, which is nice, isn't it? Radio Garden, which is quite a nice website for finding new radio stations across the world, doesn't work in the UK anymore, sadly. Like TuneIn, all access to non-UK radio stations have been blocked. Now, the block is because of a court ruling that suggested that TuneIn had to pay music licensing costs since it was earning money out of streaming overseas stations, and presumably Radio Garden have realised that they should probably block their services too in the UK, and that seems a shame to me. Dan Taylor-Watt has written whether the recent BBC presenter departures are a worrying exodus or a healthy refresh. He's a former BBC exec and he writes all kinds of exciting things, and he says that the majority of departing BBC presenters could have been earning more in the commercial sector, which is something that I would quite like to challenge. I have never seen any evidence that the money is better in commercial radio. I would love to know different. So why don't you let me know, james@crid.land, if you know whether the money's better in commercial radio or the BBC. I suspect it's better at the BBC. james@crid.land. Now, Americans spend more time with audio on mobile devices than radio receivers. That's some brand new data from Edison Research, which is quite nice to see. And one of my first jobs was playing out the Superstation. So it was nice to hear a set of jingles that have been shared again. Instead of taking a sustaining service from Hull and closing down Pennine Radio instead made the slightly bizarre choice of taking the Superstation instead only on one transmitter initially and paying for somebody to play the ads in. And I did that job for a few times and I got £5 an hour. I've no idea how that worked financially for the radio station, but still, it was a fantastic radio station. Phil Kennedy was on there, Francis Curry, and lots of other people too. The Superstation. Oh. Now, talking about professional stuff, it's time for the unprofessional bullshit corner. Would anybody like to hear how BBC Radio 2's Lisa Tarbuck introduces her news bulletins? I have produced a month's megamix for you. The distortion here is as broadcast on Europe's biggest radio station. You're welcome. Lisa Tarbuck.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the ice, Mr. Mike Powell reading the news, because this is Radio 2 and we do news properly.
BBC News at 7 o'clock. This is Mike Powell.
Oh, news. Is that all you ever do? It's Radio 2, 88291. Gary's coming up, and I smell of him. I'm sorry to have to interrupt this programme, but we've got some miserable news for you, and we're going to bring it to you on the hour, every hour.
BBC News at 7 o'clock.
This is Radio 2. It's all over the BBC Sounds app. It's on your smart speaker and on 88291. This, you lucky people's Radio 2. It's all over the place, but mainly that's just this show.
BBC News at 7 o'clock. This is Nikki Cardwell.
This is Radio 2, all juiced up like a sexy macaque. This is Radio 2 on the BBC Sounds app. It's all over your smart trousers. Oh, here she is, dressed as a big Ginger Tom. Yeah, you guessed it, ladies and gentlemen. It's Nikki Cardwell, isn't it? It's on Radio 2, the BBC Sounds app, smart speakers. She's dashed my dreams.
BBC News at 7 o'clock. This is Nikki Cardwell.
I wonder how she gets away with that. I wonder whether anybody from the radio station is actually listening to that. Who knows? Anyway, also in Unprofessional Bullshit Corner, Kiss 106.5's Kyle and Jackie O run through a 30-second dumping system on their Sydney radio station because they can't be trusted, apparently. And from the sounds of some audio, which I'm going to link to, I won't put in here because who knows what might happen. Anyway, from the sounds of that, the station can either bleep them or they can replace the audio completely if they want to. Both stars earn about 5 million Australian dollars per year, which is 3.1 million US dollars, or, 3.1 million pounds. Anyway, both stars had a big fit and decided to walk out. And it sounds actually as if Carl was broadcasting from home anyway. Gosh, Unprofessional Bullshit Corner. It's time to move on to Lazy Buggles Headline Corner. There's a bar called Hope Street Radio in Melbourne, which has an actual radio in it, and it has a event coming up, which is called Video Killed the Radio Star, which is hilarious. But I also link to an actually quite clever headline from Brisbane's Courier Mail. It was posted by the journalist who wrote it many, many years ago. And it's talking about two people who were very good on the telly and then they moved over onto the radio instead. And the headline was Video Skilled the Radio Stars. Nicely done. Excellent. And that's it. So thank you to Richard Hilton, to James Masterton, and to Brun Audio Consulting for your ongoing support of this podcast and newsletter. I'm very grateful to you. If you'd like to support my work in any way, hit the boost button if you've got one in your podcast app, or buy me a coffee, become a member to give regularly, or just give a one-off coffee or 5 if you like. I link to where to do that, in the show notes, but frankly, it's buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland. It's as easy as that. My professional website has more detail about who I am and what I do and whether I can help you further. That is at james.cridland.net. And until next time, keep listening.